I have loyalty to ideas. And of course I love the Grand Canyon, I love the Rocky Mountains, and I love Boston, and I love Chicago. But if all that disappeared and all I had was ideas, and we were on an island, that's America, that's Israel. And that's what people have to realize, that America's just a placeholder for timeless ideas. And if you fall too in love with, the specific place and all this, that's not what it is. Israel will be the exception because there is a holy connection to this land.
Ever since America's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s, the left has been in charge of virtually everything in our society, and has only been widening its lead ahead of the right since then. As cultural Marxism quickly infiltrated our government, our corporations, our churches, our media, and especially our universities, they used our own institutions to radicalize the public's moral attitude towards the critical issues. What was once revered as sacred to the old America, our America, has now become the position to fight for on the right. The effort to violently dismantle the old America and invent a new one in their image has become the position on the left. All the while, the GOP failed to keep up with the sweeping changes and had no choice but to readjust itself on the issues or risk losing political and cultural relevancy. It was either conceding their votes or conceding to the left. And they chose the left. The very people that should be on the front lines in defending America have instead effectively joined the left in pulling the thread to unravel this nation. And once prominent conservatives such as Patrick Buchanan, Peter Brimlow, Samuel Francis, and John Derbyshire witnessed what was happening to traditional American conservatism and broke off from the mainstream. They subsequently started to speak out against this sudden change in tactics among conservative ranks. But as the decades passed and the culture continued to change, their voices grew ever quieter and their ideas ever more dissident, eventually being shoved out of society and pushed underground. They were, and still are, continuously denounced, even by other so-called conservatives, as racist bigots stuck in the past. The right in America branched off into two major divisions. As for the first of these two camps, its members are typically referred to as civic nationalists, Republicans, establishment conservatives, or mainstream conservatives, many of whom in our modern age align much closer with the left than with us. So much so, in fact, that many of them join hand in hand with the left in demonizing us as racists. As for the members of the latter group, that being our group, when it comes to the names of our choosing, we often go by the titles of race realists, ethno-nationalists, and paleo-conservatives, but I would simply refer to our people as nationalists. In reality, however, our name is always changing, but whatever title we bear at the time, keep in mind it is not a name of our choosing, and is only meant to make us look like the bad guys. Our brand of conservatism has been called virtually every name in the book, from racist to neo-Nazi to fascist, to more recent examples like the alt-right, or their new favorite, white supremacist. Of course, we know that these words are really just an attempt to shut us down and to shut us out of the public square. There is also one other generalized term that the media uses today to blanket over us, and that would be far right. But is our side really far right? In fact, do any of the names forced upon us really describe who we are and what our ideas stand for? Not even close. It's just a mere attempt to cut down ideas that threaten the globalist power and agenda. Our brand of conservatism, along with the central issue of race, was pushed out of the mainstream. And with their firm grip on the means of influence and control over this country, it is our enemies that turned us into the far right, into the big bad monster in the closet that everyone should be afraid of. but nationalism is more mainstream and more in touch with nature than globalism or leftism could ever be. So what then does each side of conservatism stand for? Well, the first thing I want to make clear before I draw any distinctions is that our version of conservatism is not radically different on many political and social issues when compared with mainstream conservatism. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that we stand side by side with the mainstream right on many, if not a majority of issues, ranging from traditional gender roles to transgenderism to abortion. Of course, that is before they cave to the left on many of these issues. However, it goes without saying that there are indeed a number of critical issues that drive a massive wedge between each side. Among these would be nationhood, citizenship, economic systems, and immigration. But the largest issue that towers above all the others is the issue of race. Without question, the topic of race single-handedly sets the Nationalist Right worlds apart from the mainstream right. As a side note, I must add as a matter of fact that for the entire history of this country, from colonial times through the Revolution till about the early 1960s, the vast majority of American people, along with American intellectuals, politicians in both Republican and Democratic parties, and especially American conservatives, all agreed that race existed, race mattered, and that race was central to our identity as Americans, that we were a racially separate people from the rest of the world. With that said, when it comes to race, mainstream conservatives essentially take up the same position as liberals and leftists do, that race is only skin deep, and therefore does not matter. In the end, we are all human beings, equal in every conceivable way. Nationalists, on the other hand, know that race goes far beyond the color of our skin. We accept the fact that race is a biological and natural phenomenon, and that there are inherent differences between groups of people that have evolved over tens of thousands of years. Mainstream conservatives believe that race is irrelevant when it comes to determining who can be accepted as a member of the American nation. As civic nationalists, they state that so long as a person is law-abiding and positively contributes to our society, then they are just as American as the natives of this country. Our side, however, believes that race, particularly on a national and demographic scale, is essential in determining who is accepted into our country, and who is considered a true blood and soil member of the American nation. Nationalists also hold that race is an exclusive core attribute of the American identity, and that our identity is not up for sale to the entire world. The mainstream right has become fixated on the Martin Luther King Jr. approach to race relations, to judge a man not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. In other words, that we have transcended ourselves out of our primitive tribal past, and that we should, without exception, narrow down all assessment and treatment of others from the collective to a strictly individual basis. As for nationalists, while it is a good ideal, under the right circumstances, to treat individuals on an individual basis, and to not instantly cast judgment upon a man solely based on his broader affiliations, we as race realists also understand that both individuals and groups are different in many ways, that certain trends and habits are consistent within certain racial groups. There will inevitably be times that we must react towards a group or an individual based on the current trends and data available, and to do so in the most ethical manner possible. This might be one of the most painfully difficult things to accept in our time, when everyone is scared to look at anyone or anything in racial terms. But, especially in the broader sense of things, to do so is normal, natural, and necessary. Doing so might just save our individual lives, and our very civilization, and I think this is more relevant than ever, considering our increasingly multiracial America. With regard to the creation and maintenance of civilization, since civic nationalism proclaims that race does not matter and that all races are basically the same, they argue that any group of people in the world can effortlessly mix into a dominant people and culture without any issues. They believe that even groups of people who are completely alien to the land, its natives, its culture, and its history can swap out and replace the already existing people and somehow still be able to miraculously maintain, let alone have the desire to maintain, the exact same country in its founding image. Just a simple process of assimilation to our way of life is all it takes. In stark contrast, reality-based nationalism firmly stands behind the notion that a nation must have and preserve the overwhelming homogeneity of its founding racial stock if it seeks to perpetuate itself in its own image. Race is not only essential, but the bedrock to the building of any civilization. Each of the races across the world are inherently different, with distinct personal, physical, psychological, and intellectual capacities, and therefore build different societies. One only needs to take a quick glance around the world to see the immense differences between European-rooted societies and the rest of the world's. Nationalists understand that if you completely replace Group A with Group B in a civilization that was built and maintained by Group A, that civilization will cease to exist and will be fundamentally transformed in the vision of Group B. Our side warns that when you force millions of people from fundamentally different roots to share the same country, that nation will not only disintegrate, but will also leave fertile ground for racial violence, as America is setting itself up for. Since they give no importance to race, the establishment does not care if the founding stock of America is forever replaced. Nationalists, on the other hand, hold sacred their people and their identity, and believe that Native Americans, white Americans, should hold on to their majority status, and thus hold on to their country. We believe that the European face and character of the United States should be preserved. We believe that those of European descent, not only in America, but all across the Western world, like every other people, should have the right to their own homelands. Nationalism is not the force of hate and destruction as our enemies portray it to be. Nationalism in its purest form is the love and loyalty towards one's people, along with the nation and culture they produce. It promotes and respects the self-determination of all peoples around the world, to have their own homeland and the chance to create a country and a culture that reflects their nature and their vision. Conservatives all across the West have given up on their people and have joined the growing global anti-white movement to cash in on the remnants of a dying civilization. So it's time for us, European nationalists, to band together and to take the lead in guiding our people to our promised land, even if it means standing alone along the way.